All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us in these last sessions. It is great to be here, isn't it, David? Yeah, it's good to be here. Our talk today is about embracing a user-centered design approach to VR. User-centered design approach to VR. But it starts with a question. Who is VR for anyway? And in preparation for this talk, we asked many people this question. We asked the Reddit community of VR, the VR Reddit community. We asked different creators. We interviewed dozens of creators, dozens of academics. We asked them this question. We spoke with consumers. We even spoke with 12-year-old boys in Gorilla Tag. Who is VR for? That was a little weird. And if you take it at face value, this is a very broad question, isn't it? Who is VR for? That's like asking, who is the internet for? Or who is television for? Well, it depends, doesn't it? But if you take it at face value, it's very broad. But the purpose of it is for it to be a catalyst to a broader conversation, which we hope that you guys will join us for today, and honestly join us for after this talk as well, because we have some important things that we're thinking about here. It's been over a decade since consumer headsets came out. Palmer Luckey came to AWE in June, and he told us that the industry is quite healthy, that the industry is doing well, that it's healthy. And that was an interesting conversation, and I think partially, very much so, he's right. There are all of these amazing applications of virtual reality in the arts, in healthcare, in education. So we have this one side of the story, and that story is that, let's call it the magic. Virtual reality, the magic. This is something quite magical about this medium. But then there's this other side. There's this tension. There's a tension between the magic of VR and the reality of actually using it. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, because this is a really important discussion. We need to be having conversations, practical ones, about the challenges of virtual reality, as well as the ways that we, as creators, can make it better. So my name is Lisa. Hello, everyone. I am a user experience designer. I co-direct a studio in New York City called L3A UX Studio. We are a design and research studio. We create experiences for a bunch of different clients, many of which are in the XR space. And I've been fortunate enough to work across different industries, across healthcare, across the arts, across experiential marketing. And this has given me a broad perspective into VR and to the challenges of VR, especially when it comes to usability. David?
And I'm David. I'm an XR creator and researcher. I've been focusing on immersive narrative and live performance experiences in social VR spaces. And I am also currently the Performance Lab Fellow at the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama in London, which is a theater conservatory. And we're starting a new Center for Performance, Technology, and Equity, which I will read from the mission statement, is to catalyze research and development at the intersection of performance and technology, with community and industry partners championing inclusivity, diversity, and resource equity. So we want to really intertwine social justice with technological innovation in the performing arts.
Nice to meet you, David.
And you too, Lisa.
I'm just kidding, we know each other. All right, let's start with the VR magic, because again, this is why many of us are here. Many of us believe in VR, and it really is quite magical. There's no other medium like it. Here's a friend of ours, Jamie Pallett. He is a veteran of VR storytelling, and he says it's only in a headset that you can have a certain kind of powerful experience that you can't get any other way. It's only in a headset. How many other mediums do you know that allow you to embody another human being? Or frankly, any type of body, a body with extra limbs, or maybe a body that's not a human body at all. Does anybody remember this piece? Anybody? Raise your hand if you do. One person, two people, yeah? So this is a piece by Tyler Hurd. It's a music video in VR from 2016, and I've been onboarding people to VR using this experience for years. It's a music video where you embody this kind of goofy, Gumby-like body that you see there, and then you dance with this group of goofballs that run around you. And the scale is fantastic, and the world is magical, and I have not met a single person who doesn't light up with joy when they try this experience. No one, even the grumpiest of cynics, smile in this experience. This makes me think of another piece. I was in VR many years ago. It was my first multiplayer experience in virtual reality, and I was there with a colleague. And we were in a virtual environment, and we fist bumped in the virtual environment. And when we did, my controller vibrated when our virtual hands collided. And that felt so real. It felt like I was actually there with this other person, like I was actually interacting with him physically. Again, magic, isn't it? David, I know that you have a lot of experience in social experiences in VR. Why don't you tell us about it?
Talking about the magic of VR, the magic really comes from this idea of embodied presence in the virtual space. And when you're in a shared virtual space with other people, you have this sense of presence of these other people. And as I think probably many of you know, some of the most popular applications of VR actually use that sense, use that effect, right? Gorilla Tag, as Lisa mentioned, is extremely popular apparently with 13-year-old boys.
You guys
but
know
basically,
this, right? 1 million users a day.
Where you can hang out in
That's
a virtual
astounding.
space and pretend to be gorillas together with your friends, right? VR Chat is another very popular platform, as are many of these other platforms that very briefly were called metaverse platforms until that fell out of favor. But the idea of being together with other people and having shared experiences. And it really is the technology that can get you the closest to feeling like you're there with other people. And I've been working with this space, along with many colleagues, for many years to look at how we can create theatrical experiences and tell stories using live performance as VR theater. And taking the kind of storytelling that we've been doing on stages for 2,500 years or doing on screen for approximately 125 years, but doing it in such a way that you can actually be in it and inhabit those worlds and experience them together with other people.
All right. So, magic is over, guys. We love VR. It's magic on your face. But let's talk about the practical realities in virtual reality. There is a gap. There's a gap between how we talk about VR, how we philosophize about VR, and the reality of how people actually experience it. We have a friend in New York, David Lobser, and he's been in the industry for many years, and he said, conceptually, who doesn't want to step into a new world? And then you get there, and it's kind of like a dead shopping mall. Everything is set up by corporations. It's all a bit janky. I teach a class in New York called Designing for XR, and towards maybe the middle of the semester, I give students an assignment. I tell them, list all of the things that suck about VR. And this is after they've been struggling to design for VR for weeks, and they jump on this assignment. They absolutely love it. It's kind of like a therapy session for them. So maybe we can try something right now. I have been in VR since 2016, and I still get motion sickness in many, many apps. David, what sucks about VR for you?
Many things, but one thing that's very pertinent for me is the discomfort. So I have a bulging disc in my neck, which when it flares up causes nerve pain all down my arm and numbness. And when I'm working on a VR project for too long, and have a VR headset on my head for too long, that can flare up and cause extreme pain for weeks on end.
Wah, wah. Anybody else have a sucky VR experience? Yes, please.
I've been through 2 sets of glasses because the headsets broke the frames.
Oh, I'm sorry, that sucks. Anybody else? One more. Something that sucks about VR. Yes, you in the back.
You're more clumsy.
Say that again?
You're more clumsy around.
Yes,
Your moves is not natural.
absolutely. Super clumsy. 100% agree. So this is the list that we came up with, and it's divided into 3 categories: ergonomics and health concerns, user experience, and then operational issues. And these last ones are more related towards industry, towards experience that aren't necessarily for at-home use. So VR, this is what sucks about it. And the things that we hear all the time are, it's geeky, or the headset physically hurts me. That sounds like you, David. The headset physically hurts me. This I hear all the time with users. It's going to ruin my hair. This is a huge concern. You laugh, but I'm serious. A big concern for people. It's going to ruin my hair, or it's going to mess up my makeup, and people just don't want to put a headset on. I keep having to reset this thing. I think everybody has this problem, updates, etc. You have to reset the freaking thing. Or how did these effing controllers work again? This is courtesy of my father, who has a headset, and he never remembers how the controllers work, or frankly, how any of it works. And I bet that this is not just a problem of my father. I bet that a lot of people experience this. People forget how the interface works between uses. Interactions feel uncomfortable, or they feel unintuitive. Just so you know, that is not my father. That's not him. That's just... Sorry, I had to. So after 10 years of consumer-oriented VR, it's just not frictionless, is it? So what do we do? What do we do? How do we make it better? And this is for all of us in the room. We want to make it better. And we can't solve every problem. We can't solve it overnight for sure. But we can make incremental changes, both as creators, as individual creators, and as an industry as a whole. So maybe the question, who is VR for? Maybe that's not quite right. That almost seems like the media question that gets asked when people say, VR is dead. Instead, I wonder if the real question here is, who is your VR for anyway? Meaning, who is your target audience? Who are you designing for? And also, what are the barriers that your audience faces in using your virtual reality solution? So we had that list of things that suck. We also have a list of all the things that you can improve in VR. Big list here, yeah? Meta actually recently came out with a human interface guideline, and that covers many of these points. And in fact, there are lots of guidelines online. There's lots of checklists of the do's and the don'ts of VR. But we want to address more larger, bigger picture challenges, because we believe that at the heart of improving VR, there are larger foundational considerations that creators have to consider when they're designing for VR. So these are the 5 points that we've been thinking about. And we'll start with embracing design thinking. What is design thinking? So design thinking is an approach to problem solving that emphasizes understanding user needs, identifying the problem, considering the context, and having a clear purpose. So who are we designing for? What's the problem? What's the context? And why are we building this thing in the freaking first place? And using a framework like this is incredibly valuable when you're designing for virtual reality. So creators need to acknowledge who their VR users are. So many of us design for ourselves, right? For a tech-savvy, esoteric audience. But so many times, our end users are not that. Our end users are not us. And we need to consider the backgrounds and the pain points of our actual target audience. So that's embracing design thinking, and that's understanding the user. The next thing is studying the systems around the product. What does that mean? VR does not exist in a vacuum. It is used in a variety of different contexts, and we need to understand those contexts. So instead of just focusing on the cool thing that we're building here, the thing that people actually see in the headset. We need to be thinking about the entire user journey, the pre-VR experience, the post-VR experience, and then the entire ecosystem of the experience around the VR. And I actually think that overlooking this is what leads to pilot purgatory for many applications, VR pilot purgatory. So VR pilot purgatory is a company introduces some VR system, some VR experience, but it doesn't go anywhere past the pilot phase. As an example, let's imagine, hypothetically, there's a company that's created a biology app, a VR biology app, where you can study molecules and cells, and they show it to a bunch of kids, and the kids freaking love it. They're mesmerized, you know, they're oohing, they're eyeing, they're giggling. Huge success, right? Maybe. But is it really a success? What does it look like if it gets truly adopted in a classroom? I've been chatting with an educator who uses VR for primary school kids, grades 3 through 4. And he says VR has incredible potential in education, but there are major practical barriers to widespread use in the classroom. And the question for many of these schools is, do the benefits outweigh the costs, the resources, and the time that's required to effectively have these solutions within a classroom? So when we say understand the systems of a product, we mean we have this biology app. How do we answer all of these other questions? How do we answer who's going to be managing the equipment or the software updates? Or what happens when the batteries run out? Or what does the IT department have to think about all this? Or how about all of those tech-averse teachers that don't want your freaking solution in a classroom because they're dealing with 25 different kids that are going crazy? Or what about the different security concerns? Or the different levels of ability for the kids? What happens with all of that? And a school, they might be really interested in your VR solution, but if you're not guiding them, if you're not supporting them in all of these things, they might just say, thank you, but no thank you. So VR is asking to disrupt all of these environments. And while we might think as creators that what we're creating is amazing, we need to understand all of the systems and the context that surrounds the products that we're building, whether it's in a classroom, whether it's in a museum, whether it's in a hospital, at a performance, or elsewhere. David, safeguarding users, what do you think?
Sure, yeah, well, I think this is really important. Oh, I get the clicker. So we have to remember, as creators, surrendering to another reality is an act of trust. And this is true in other media as well. It's certainly true in theater and really any narrative form. Your audience is trusting you to take them on a journey that is well-designed, safe, and satisfying. So we need to take care of our users. So there are a few different aspects of this. There are actually a lot of aspects of this. But we're thinking about these three in particular. The virtual body, mental well-being, and personal data. And the first thing to remember is that a virtual experience is still a lived experience, which means that when I am embodied in a space, whether it's the real world or the virtual world, what happens to me is an experience, is something that I experience, and I will come away from that with a memory, which could be a good memory or it could be a traumatic memory. So it's really important to keep that in mind. And there's really some sobering studies about how negative experiences in VR can carry on after the actual VR experience is over and lead to negative ruminations. And then, of course, again, with the, sorry for the, it's a lot, it's harder to watch when it's that big. Again, if you remember that brief shining moment when the metaverse was all the rage, there was an onslaught of articles about people getting harassed in the metaverse, right? But of course, this goes back much, much further than that. In any social online space, people get harassed, but it's different. when you're embodied in that space with other people. It's as if your YouTube comments could chase you, right? That's what it feels like. So we have to think about, well, how do we mitigate that kind of a risk? And one thing that's really interesting from this paper, Safeguarding the Metaverse, if a space lacked a sense of monitored hosting or purpose, there was an increased likelihood of harassment, especially to female users. So when we talk about designing experiences, when I'm talking with my colleagues about the sort of theatrical experiences, we're talking about creating an experience that actually has embedded in it sort of a set of norms and expected behaviors, like we do in the real world in most social experiences, right? We want to try to create something that is going to be supportive of pro-social behavior among the users. And then there's this other aspect, which is data. As Jeremy Balance's lab at Stanford demonstrated, they have a couple papers about this, VR tracking data produces personally identifiable information. And it doesn't take a whole lot of it to be able to really identify individuals. And you probably sort of know this from your own experience. You can recognize somebody that you know well from their gait, even if they're walking down the street 2 blocks away. And of course, VR headsets need all of that kind of information for you to be able to interact with the virtual environment. But what's happening with that data? And we need to be mindful of this. What stops companies from giving away your data if they go out of business, for example, or are otherwise acquired? The current controversy with 23andMe is an example of this, right? But even before that, what if they make deals with other data brokers or other technology firms and we don't know about it, but all of our data can be transferred to them? So this is something we really need to watch out for in this heyday of surveillance capitalism. So another thing that is, this also came from Jamie Pallett, advice to VR creators, do your homework.
Or homework.
What? Oh, yeah. VR is new and emerging, but it's not that new, right? Consumer VR has been around for about 10 years, but VR research and development goes back at least 50 years. So there's a lot of great research, there's a lot of great work in the space, and we should be looking at what was the lessons that have been learned by others in the past, and not just assuming that what we're doing is the first time it's been done. A lot of us are repeating mistakes that have already been made. Read relevant books. There's lots of excellent literature out there. This is just a sample of them. Learn from smart people. Again, many of these people are here today, but follow them, learn what they're thinking about, what they're talking about, and what they're learning about. And then spend time in VR, because you have to spend time in the medium to understand what works and what doesn't. And our time is flashing, but this is a really important point. The other thing is we have to make good content better content for more people. So this is a quote from Alex Coulomb, our friend who is here in the audience, and our colleague. How few extracurricular activities keep us in VR for more than like 10 minutes compared to other devices that we have. So we need to think about how we make more content for more users, and part of this is going to be about more diverse creators. And I know that we're all thinking about this and interested in this, and a lot of this is going to come down to where the funding is coming from, but the broader the pool of creators, the more stories, different kinds of stories are being told, the more different kinds of experiences are being shared. And we also need to think about diversifying the audience base, which means accessibility and designing for different accessibility needs. And it also means thinking about different kinds of content for different kinds of people, because not everybody wants to be a gorilla or wants to be shooting zombies or things like that, right? And then finally, high quality content that leverages the medium, the magic that we're talking about. So we can do amazing things, we can create these amazing experiences. Coming back to our friend David Lopser, I hope VR is good enough that I can retire in it. Maybe that's not exactly how I feel, but I do hope it gets better. And I think that there are so many great things that VR could contribute to make our lives better in the future. So the whole point, the reason we're here today is to say, let's all get together and let's make better VR.
Let's make better VR.
Thank you.
Lisa, David, thank you very much. I think we do have time for a couple questions. Questions from the audience, I believe, come on. Yes, here we go. You always need to wait those 5-6 seconds. Here we go.
Well, it's like not purely about VR, but like obviously we're now talking today a lot of mixed reality and how to consider like combine these two and how to make it better. Any advice?
I think that most of the points that we made are actually applicable across the board to any spatial computing. If you think about it, safeguarding users, that's not just virtual reality. There might be different types of safeguards, but that's still something that we need to be thinking about the end user, thinking about the systems. All of the high-level points that we mentioned can be used for any type of spatial computing solution, I believe, at least for the most part.
Thanks for the presentation. I think what I found most valuable was this pre-VR, VR, and post-VR. I don't think a lot of people think about that way. And you give an example of education where all those questions about monitoring kids and like what happens when the battery runs out. I'm curious, who do you think should take ownership of this pre-VR, VR, and post-VR? Should it be the studio who develops a solution, some kind of education? Should it be the school that's like piloting that? Like, is there a place for a completely new entity that somehow, it's not a creative studio, it's just like managing the VR project? Because it feels like a massive system, right? Like it's just not one part.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a massive system. I don't think the school is going to be the solution because they don't have enough resources. It's too big of a challenge for them. So I think whoever is providing the solution is the one that needs to guide the school, and it needs to be a collaboration also because the school is the one that can help you understand their system, right? It's not just school generic. Every school works differently. So it needs to be a collaboration between the creators and the developers and then wherever they're going to plug their system into.
And there are some other great examples. So Lisa was telling me about an example in healthcare, right, where it was something for patients, but their nurses would need to be able to sort of use it, like guide the patients through it, which meant the nurses all needed to be trained, but nurses rotate shifts in different ways, so it's not just one or two nurses, it's all 50 nurses on a ward or something, and suddenly you're dealing with a problem that a hospital does not have the resources to manage, right? So you really need to be thinking about the whole context.
And then really quick, a good example, an example where something like this works is in a museum in New York, the Intrepid Museum. They have a VR experience within the museum. The reason that it works is because the museum is completely hands-off. The museum is like, here's the space, you guys take care of it. You guys take care of everything from ticketing to docents to, taking care of all of the hardware. Like, this is you because we don't have the resources, frankly, to take this on ourselves. And that's a really common solution just because museums are extremely averse to taking on that kind of responsibility on themselves.
Interesting separation. So would you say for right now, would it be easier to bring the experience with the person to school, to the healthcare, to hospital? That's a software, that's the person who's going to help you with that software rather than training the actual staff to use the software?
I think as a starting point, yes, but you also 100% need to have a VR champion within whatever system you're going into. You're not going to go into a school where there's nobody that's, truly passionate and advocating about VR.
Great presentation, first of all. One of the big challenges I've always had is working with clients and the perception gap. There's high expectation, all the hype when new hardware comes out, and then there's the experience, and then there's designing the experience, and you've got to really match those expectations with what else is happening in the world. Can you talk to us about how you manage that?
So, Lisa, you work with more clients directly than I do. Do you want to?
I mean, setting expectations is really hard. One of the challenges is even just putting your clients into a headset. There's so much resistance. We can sell the shit out of VR. Magic, look at this. It's so amazing. But it's so hard to get actual stakeholders and the people at the top to put on a headset and to understand what's going on. And I think that's something that needs to be bridged. And I think setting expectations in terms of being transparent, not just being salesmen, being truly honest to what the system does, what it doesn't do, how it's going to unravel in the future, or how it's going to scale. I think honesty here is really quite key. You don't want to bullshit your clients because, please go ahead.
Experimentation, I think, is one of our biggest challenges as an industry, is really, getting people to commit to this space and to commit, more importantly, funds.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So guys, I think we need to move on. But thank you very much, Lisa. Thanks, David, very much.
Thank you.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to welcome in a couple of minutes the next speakers. We will have Philip and Alessandro joining in for community.